Welcome, Katlego. This is certainly interesting times, both locally and internationally. So I look forward to the conversation.
Yeah, thank you, Theo. Yeah, you're right. There's certainly a lot going on, lots of headlines. But I think let's start locally. There's a lot there around the Pala farm robbery and so on. So your thoughts on that?
Well, it creates news headlines. Let's just not kid ourselves. It creates news headlines. It creates a lot of publicity. It creates a lot of media attention. But let's look at what the elements are that we know. Number one, we've also had the last report of the Zondo Commission on state capture. And the conclusion is clear. The ANC under Jacob Zuma was involved in state capture. It was driven by the party itself, and Jacob Zuma was critical to it. So that is history, and that we now know.
Yeah.
The challenge on that is how the president will react in terms of the people noted in that report. Remember, the president asked for 4 months to study the report. Now, just think for a second. It is something like 6,000 pages. So you need time to study the report, and also need to look at the recommendations. So that's going to take time, and we're probably going to see those headlines keep on the press as we carry on. On the other side of the coin, remember this, nobody can be charged based on the report. This report now goes, the elements that's noted there, goes to the different state organs, National Prosecuting Authority. Yeah. They need to look at it and build a proper case where they can, and then charge people based on that. So this was not a court of law in terms of finding somebody guilty. That is the role of the prosecuting authority and the police in the end, to have to now do proper analysis, do a proper build a case and charge somebody if it comes down to it. That is going to happen. It's going to take time, but that is going to happen out of that. Unfortunately, or however you look at it, we're in a position whereby a lot of people are fingered in the report, including our current president. Yeah. Our president is noted in the report. He was involved. He was chairperson of the committee that decided who's going to do what, where they are going to be allocated. And for that role, also the role for not speaking up is noted clearly. There's also a mention made of perhaps we should pick the president directly, but those are recommendations. Coming to Pala and where our president is, and Pala is the farm that the president owns, that the money was stolen. In the Zondo Commission, quite frankly, Arthur Fraser, who made those comments, is noted specifically as being a party to try to keep President Zuma out of jail, and Zuma assisted in keeping Mr. Fraser out of jail. So there's a relationship there. But if you look at where that leaves the ANC in terms of internal politics, so let's first look at the ANC from an internal point of view, and then to the national election in 2024. From an internal policy point of view, we are now in the midst of the provinces deciding who they will back in the provincial national executive councils, and that will all follow through to December's leadership conference. Yeah. Now, what we are seeing in the provinces is there is no clear challenger for Cyril Ramaphosa coming to the fore. There will be challenges for Deputy President and Secretary General. So there is no clear challenger for Cyril Ramaphosa at this point for leadership of the ANC. That's point number one. Point number two, for as long as there is no clear challenger for the presidency, it means that Pala will be viewed from a legal perspective. And the legal advice apparently in this respect to the president is that keep dead quiet. Keep quiet. There is a legal process going to happen. Keep quiet. Now that is normal legal advice. So for as long as there's not a challenger, expect the president to say as little as possible as not to incriminate him at some point down the line. But this is not going to go away. So that is within the ANC. From the internal ANC point of view, remember Pala was, as they call it, a hobby. He had a person responsible to manage the farm, to manage the bookkeeping, and when this surfaced early in 2020, he actually, to a large extent, asked his farm manager, his bookkeeper, the VIP security unit to please handle it on his behalf. And that, I think, is what we're going to have to live with. So my view is that, yes, it's damaging. It's damaging to the party. It's damaging to Mr. Ramaphosa. But for as long as there's not a challenger, don't expect major changes. It will have, however, a big impact on the 2024 national election. The internal ANC-owned documents show that their support is closer to something like 42%, which means we are moving into an area where we will have coalition politics, and where that'll create the runway as we move forward. From a financial markets point of view, specifically investment in South Africa, please note that the Zondo Commission tells us what has happened. That's why we have lost these years. It doesn't tell us what is going to happen. We're now in a position where hopefully we've learned from state capture, we've learned from corruption, and some of the mechanisms put in place as per Zondo's recommendation will assist us going forward. So I am not, it's headlines, and we now need to focus on implementing, but from an investment point of view, I don't think there's anything in there that will make us change your 10, 20, 30-year view on South African markets and the asset allocation. What might change that is the fact that hopefully over time we will get the democracy going into a position whereby we will start to live with more of a coalition government point of view. And I think if you take a 10, 20, 30-year view, that we probably now at the position where what we're seeing in municipal level in terms of coalitions we'll see in national level. But I don't foresee any of this to be to such a nature that you should change your portfolio or your structure of your portfolio.
Okay. I agree. No changes to portfolios and structures. But internationally
Yes.
as well, there's a lot going on there.
Yeah.
Concerns around inflation,
Yeah.
increasing interest rates. That's definitely affecting markets. Your take
Yeah,
on it?
we started the year with this position between global inflation starting to pick up, economies growing, getting post-COVID growth, and interest rates needs to be decided amongst these. And what has happened was inflation surprised on the upside, not only in South Africa but worldwide. So inflation was stronger than markets anticipated, than people anticipated. So therefore the reaction from central banks is stronger than markets anticipated. But that is more of a normalization factor in inflation. Remember, we are still, interest rate point of view, we're still something like 2% lower on prime than we were pre-COVID. The rest of the world from 2008 lived in a very low interest rate environment worldwide. And the world is kind of normalizing. If you take a look at, let's say, the US long bond, from 1990 to now, it was more than 4% was the average. It turned at close to 1%. It turned in a lot of countries at zero interest rates, which are now starting to work through the process. So a lot of this is normalization of interest rates. And I think one must be careful to look at the normalization of interest rates as a massive change. Yes, for the people now involved is something they haven't experienced. It will be volatile, markets will be uncertain, but inflation, why the central banks are taking a view on inflation, as we carry on, you will find that central banks will go actively to try to bring inflation down, which is also part of normalizing. So unfortunately, I think volatility is going to be with us for a few months to come. Do I predict a recession or growth? I've got no idea. I don't know. What I do know is that if you look at the central bank's position, they might be behind the curve, but companies are in a much better position than they were pre the COVID pandemic. And if inflation is of a nature that at some elements we will see a peak, and at some elements it will start to come down. Inflation works in cycles, and that cycle will turn again. So be very careful not to focus on people making predictions now. 6 months ago, if you were to fix your home loan in the US, you had the lowest rate in decades. Now, 6 months later, it's one of the highest rates in decades. So people then were saying, gee, interest rates are still going to zero. Now all of a sudden, they're looking the complete different way. In 6 or 12 or 18 months, it will be different again. Remember, your investments is usually made for decades. So these 6 months or 3 months changes, be very careful not to focus on it, not to focus too much on it. But having said all of this, Katlego, if you look at our strategy, our Houseview strategy that we manage, that we monitor, that we implement, first of all, from a currency point of view, we the last few days or weeks, we've been around 16 to the dollar. What is our currency exchange rate view if you want to take money offshore, rebalance your portfolio?
We're still at the level where if the rand is 15.50 to the dollar, that hasn't changed. So if you do need to take money out of the country, we think that's the appropriate level. As you said, it's been at around 16, so we urge clients to be patient and wait for...
Just get all the documentation in place. That's if you're underweight. And if you look at the volatility, I agree, 1550 is levels that we see from time to time. It might take a bit longer, it might be shorter, but that's our level. Then, if you were to invest, put money into the market, what's our view in terms of over what kind of period should you put money into the market?
So locally, we are phasing in across 6 months at the moment, and as well as internationally. So we are sticking to that.
Perhaps just that phase in what people need to understand is because we cannot time market. We would have loved to know when the market's bottoming or when it's going to go up or when it's going to go. Unfortunately, we don't know. So what we found is that if we were phasing into a period, the chances of getting big spikes right or wrong is a lot less. So therefore, as we phase in, if the market goes down, well, it goes down. We might get we might phase into a lower price, which is fine. That's a principle why we do it. If the market goes up, well, we got some at the lower level, but because we don't believe anybody, and there's no scientific proof anywhere that people can time the market. There's an old story: top pickers and bottom pickers will become cotton pickers. You cannot time the market. So in this uncertain environment, our view is rather to say, take a conservative view, but there's no evidence that one can time the next move in the market. Katlego, and that's why we stick to the 6 months. But we're also getting closer to tax season. From a client perspective, retail investors, what is the current position regarding the tax season coming up?
So clients can start filing their returns from the 1st of July. From a client perspective, of course, they need their tax certificates, which most of them are available and have been sent out. I think the last of it will be the net group investments tax statements, which should be available around the 8th or the 10th of July.
So in that respect, if you are in our net group investments, just be slightly patient. It's going to take some time, but it's on its way.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. Certainly, I think we live in interesting times. And I do think that be very careful not to look every day at the daily news. Markets go up and down, and simply because there's no mathematical or scientific proof that one can time the market, rather focus on the long term. For most people, this is 10, 20, 30-year money, and we take a 10, 20, 30-year view. So don't react on short-term movements. These things come and go along the way.
Thanks, Theo. Good to chat.